So I am Allison Green. I'm the manager of partner training, support, and engagement at MICA, the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Hopefully you've joined us before, but if not, we do a free webinar once a month, hopefully on the third Monday of the month from 1 to 2:30 p.m. So I'm so glad that you all could join us today. Today we're going to be discussing understanding the McKinney Vento Act. And with me, I have Eleanor, who is doing backup tech from MICA. We will take questions throughout. So if you have a question, put it in the chat and we will make sure to ask Julie right away. Any that we can't get to during the webinar, we will try to answer after via email. The PowerPoint will be shared in the chat for you, and a recording of this webinar will be posted on MICA's YouTube page in about a week. So if you want to recommend this to anyone else, it will be there or rewatch. With that, I am going to pass this over to Julie Ratekin from Wayne Metro and from NACHI.
Thanks, Allison. As Allison said, I am Julie Ratekin. I am the Assistant Director of Programs at Wayne Metropolitan Community Action Agency. And we host a partnership with Wayne RESA to provide technical support and training along with supports to families under the McKinney Vento Act to all the school districts in Wayne County. In addition to that, I'm also the Vice President of the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, which is a national membership body that provides training and technical assistance for McKinneyVento liaisons throughout the country. So just a little background of who I am and why Allison asked me to help present with this today, and hoping to give you all some information that hopefully you've wanted to know or didn't know about McKinneyVento and better ways in which housing agencies and those that serve homeless populations can interact with McKinneyVento and help support our students within school. So today we're going to talk a little bit about why we're talking about McKinneyVento. Talk about the history of McKinneyVento, who is eligible for McKinneyVento services, what those services even look like, and how we can partner to better with school districts and one another to help serve students experiencing homelessness. As Allison said, feel free to pop questions in the chat throughout. They will let me know when questions are there. So hopefully we can answer them live while we're talking about different topics throughout the agenda today. If there's something that we're going through and you want me to expand upon more on as we're talking, throw that in there as well, and we can be sure to include that in our conversation today. And hopefully you all enjoy today's presentation. So why are we here? First and foremost, we're here because we know that homeless service providers, shelters, housing agents need to partner with our school districts to make sure that those families and the students in which we serve have every access that the students need to be successful within school. So we know that our families and schools partner on a day-to-day basis. We know that our families and our schools see each other Monday through Friday. They know our kids in and out. A lot of families use our school districts as a safe haven, a place in which they can go where they know that they're going to be supported and have needs met. We also know that our schools and our service providers need to work together and partner together so that we're able to address the needs of our students that represent at school, whether it's instability of housing or other resources that a family might need. We're able to know how to connect those to our service providers so that we're able to make sure that those families have those connections, that we're able to share resources to families on all sorts of different topics that they might need assistance with. Being able to clearly articulate to our families what services and what benefits are out there to them throughout the community. And then we also know that our service providers and our families partner. There's a lot of times where a family may enter shelter and a school district might not know yet. So figuring out how those providers can let the school district know that a family is experiencing homelessness and that a student needs support. So really looking at all the different partnerships in which we have with one another, with our families and our students have with each of us, and ways in which we can bridge those gaps between us to help serve those students experiencing homelessness so that they have a stable education, a consistent education, and everything they need to be in a place where they are able to consistently learn and grow within their education. So we're going to start with what is McKinney-Vento. Where did it start? How did we get here? What does it look like? So McKinney-Vento was founded in 1987 through McKinney and Vento. There's about just under $5 million worth of funding. It was really just meant at that point in time for states at a state level to remove barriers to education and allowing for students to either stay in the school they were attending when they were homeless or enroll in a new school. Very basic, very just, we have homeless kiddos, we need to do something for them. In 1990, it was reauthorized, which allowed the states to provide local grants. It also let school districts know it may make sense for you all to have a liaison within your district. From there, in 1994, we increased quite a bit in funding, went up to about $30 million in funding. We talked about anti-segregation, that you as a district or as an education entity weren't allowed to just segregate homeless students into their own classroom, making sure that homeless students were a part of general population, just like every other student would be, and allowing for the fact that if you were to receive a subgrant from Department of Education, that you did have a liaison required and enrolled within those funds. From there, we went to 2001 through the No Child Left Behind Act. In 2001, it required that every single local education agency, so your school district, your charter schools, all have a homeless liaison identified. It allowed for immediate enrollment for school of origin. So really defined what that school of origin or stay in the original school meant from 1987 and really defined it in 2001. Added in the requirements for transportation back to that school of origin, put in a policy for disputes, and over doubled the funding allowed for McKinney-Vento to about $70 million across the nation. From 2001 to 2015, little minor changes happened here and there. Things got a bit more specific, but in 2015, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, we reauthorized one more time and added a bit more on what this looks like for our school districts. ESSA determined that a liaison must be able to carry out their 10 duties of a liaison. They must help with professional development, and state coordinators must provide special professional development to every liaison. It extended school of origin to include preschool and to include feeder schools. It removed foster care from the definition, as foster care has other protections under other acts. It increased the need for credit accrual for counselors and for participation with FAFSA and transitioning to higher education, and increased funding one more time to about $85 million worth of funding. We're still right around that same amount of funding, maybe a little bit more right now. Through this past year, we've learned more about how to serve students virtually through the pandemic, how to make sure that our students are connected, how to make sure we keep identifying and enrolling in students. And this year, really looking at how to re-engage students into education that might have fallen through the cracks from the past year and a half of being virtual. So that's a little bit of background of where we are, how we got here, and a little bit on what McKinney-Vento was and how it started. So McKinney-Vento requires that every state has a state coordinator at their state education agency here in Michigan. That's the Michigan Department of Education. It requires that the state coordinator have sufficient time to be able to do all of the duties prescribed to them, some of which are ensuring that McKinney-Vento students receive the full protection under McKinney Vento Act as the law states, making sure that students and districts have what they need to be successful within their programs. There to monitor all the school district LEAs, provide professional development to the district LEAs and other district staff, making sure that they're gathering and posting homeless data on Michigan's Department of Education website to not segregate anybody, but to make sure we have some just base numbers and data of what it looks like to be homeless across Michigan within our school systems. And then to collaborate with a broad array of educators, service providers, community organizations, and policymakers. So really at that state level of setting that foundation for what our partnerships look like across sectors, across services, on how in which we can really partner together to ensure that as a state, we are serving students experiencing homelessness to the best of our ability and being able to make sure that we are looking at ways in which we can ensure that those students don't fall through the cracks and have some stable housing along with their stable school to be successful within their education. So with that, our local education agencies, so our school districts and our charter schools here at our local levels, they all must also designate a liaison. A part of the 10 duties that those liaisons have are to identify students experiencing homelessness, anyone who might be eligible. So working with other housing providers, shelters, community members, school district staff, whatever it looks like, to make sure they're identifying students, putting policies and procedures in place to help identify students experiencing homelessness, posting public notices of McKinney-Vento rights to parents and youth in areas in which parents and youth frequent. So what does that look like? We have rights posters, some that are provided for us from some of our national partners, some that have been created locally. They're just posters that describe what the rights are of a homeless student. That right to immediate education, that right to enrollment. We'll get into what all those look like. Transportation back to school of origin. This gives a synopsis of what the students' rights are. They ask that we make sure that those are in places in which families frequent. So making sure that those posters are posted within our shelters, making sure they're in our housing agencies, making sure that they're in our libraries, our soup kitchens, in laundromats that a lot of our families might go to. If we know there's areas where a lot of families live within hotels, making sure those posters are posted within those hotels. In police stations and other places in which families or youth might frequent, especially those that are likely to be experiencing homelessness. Really doing a community-wide effort to make sure that those rights are posted everywhere in which a parent or student might be. Liaisons are also required to provide professional development and support to every school district staff member. Everything from your administrative staff to your teaching staff, to your support services, to your bus drivers, and everybody in between, to make sure that the second a student is to enter your building and mention McKinney-Vento or present some factors of homelessness, being able to know what to do in that situation and who within the district is the go-to person to ensure that that student has the support that they need in school. Liaisons are required to connect young children with preschool, Head Start, and early intervention, along with connecting students to any other support staff, any other supports in the school they need. For example, special education, talented and gifted programs, anything that the student might need to help support them as well. Connect families and youth with housing, health, mental health, and other services. And they must be able to carry out all the 10 duties listed in the law for a liaison. A lot of those just include more collaboration, more training, and some specifics around working with unaccompanied homeless youth. Oh, I just jumped really far there, sorry. Local liaisons and state coordinators, they also have some commonalities between each other. So state coordinators must post an annually updated liaison list for everybody to see on the state website. So Michigan Department of Education does this through CEPI and the Education Master. So there's links to the list and how to download a on-the-spot, readily updated list on an ongoing basis on MDE's website. State coordinators must also provide professional development for district liaisons. Liaisons must participate in that said professional development as mandated by the state coordinator. So this is just to ensure that as things change, as roles change, as we are finding ways in which we can better work together with our youth, of making sure that all of our liaisons are on that same page and that same boat, and making sure that we as state educators are doing everything we can to ensure that students experiencing homelessness have what they need to be successful, and that we're doing the best we can to make sure that our local liaisons have the tools in their toolbox to be able to serve those families as well. You're on mute, Alice.
See, thanks. We have a couple of questions that have come in if you
Yeah.
are ready. Okay, so the first one is, how long does the transportation back to school of origin last?
Yeah, so we're going to get into transportation in a bit, but just for right now, to answer the question, transportation back to school of origin lasts the entire time in which the student is experiencing homelessness. And we'll get into a little bit more of what that definition looks like here in a few minutes.
Okay, so I'm the director of shelter services at a homeless shelter, and I would love a poster or flyer to display and hand out to families with school-age children. How do I go about getting one?
Yep, so there's multiple ways. Depending on what area you're in, you can reach out to your consortium coordinator within your area for McKinneyVento. The list is listed on MG's website, or I can let you know who that is. They're also downloadable for free on NCHE's, so the National Center for Homeless Education's website, and their website we listed at the end of the PowerPoint, where you can go ahead and download some of those free resources, or even order some for print for free.
All right. We have, will the penalties for failure to comply with the McKinney Vento Act be addressed in this presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll keep the rest of the question when we get there. Okay, that's it for now.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. Okay, so what do we know as a group, especially those that have attended a MICA training before? What do we know about homelessness? Per our annual report from 2019, so this is a little bit older since we did this just before this one came out. We know that families comprise nearly half of the homeless population in Michigan. There are roughly 746 unaccompanied youth, 15,577 children and youth experiencing homelessness. 7 years old is the average age of a child experiencing homelessness. It's the average age. So just think about that for a second. The 7 is the average age of a child experiencing homelessness. 43% of homeless families are working poor. So 43% of our families have jobs, have income, but don't have enough income to support housing. Michigan is short roughly 200,000 affordable housing units. Now we know some of these have changed slightly, so we'll have to visit the most recent MICA annual report to get some of the updated ones that just came out a few weeks ago, so make sure you check that out. But this is where we're looking at last school year. At the end of 2019, what this looked like, this is what our families look like when we across Michigan. As we think homelessness, this is the data that was kind of in all of our minds. What does that look like for K-12? What does it look like for our school districts? Our school districts have so many more students experiencing homelessness because our definition is a bit different. We're getting into a little bit of what that definition looks like here in a second, but here's what our averages for students experiencing homelessness look like over the past 6 school years. We have data up through the 2018-19 school year. We're just finalizing the 2021 data, so that'll be out soon. But roughly, there are just shy of 35,000 students experiencing homelessness that were identified in schools last school year, or in the 2018-19 school year. We know at the end of the 2018-19 school year that we hit the pandemic, so we lost some numbers in that realm. Looking at this and the increase of seeing what awareness looks like, 2014-2015 is the last year in which foster care students were included in the McKinney-Vento definition, and when the ESSA took over into what the new definition and the new realms look like. In 2019-2020, it looks like we dropped a little bit to that 32,935 K-12 students, looking to finalize those numbers again here shortly. We know that roughly 75% of our households are households that are doubled up. So 75% of the students that are experiencing homelessness within our school districts don't meet the HUD definition of homeless. So thinking about that in our realm of how we work together, how we partner, what we can do for those aspects. We see quite a few students that are in a sheltered or housing unit, about 2,500. So, about an eighth of our families that are living hotel motel, and then a small percentage that are living in an unsure statement or an unsheltered statement where they don't know where they're at. So thinking about this and thinking about the data and thinking about the ways in which we all can work together and all the different funding that's out there and funding that's coming, what is it that we can do to help serve that big bulk of students that school districts experience that homelessness, that families that are in housing crisis, that are in a doubled up situation, that just don't have another place to turn to. So across Michigan, how does this data represented? We have 33 consortiums. So those are the areas across Michigan that have local education agency consortiums. So typically it's an ISD and ISD level. Across many consortiums, we have multiple ISDs together as one consortium, but it represents 83 counties across Michigan and over 900 LEAs. So when you look at Southeast Michigan, for example, Wayne County is one consortium, Oakland County is a consortium, Monroe County is a consortium, Macomb County is a consortium. As you start to get up into other parts of Michigan, you'll see the entire UP is one consortium. You have 4 or 5 communities up in the upper part of Michigan that are a consortium together. So what this means is all these districts come together underneath one entity to provide training and technical assistance, to receive that subgrant from MDE to provide those training and technical assistance and some supports to our families experiencing homelessness in those areas. Almost 95% of all LEAs participated in the 2021 school year under consortiums. And it is a competitive process at least every 3 years for the consortium and what the consortiums look like. Consortiums are typically through the RESOR ISD, that county level education entity. So what is McKinney-Vento? Who is homeless under this definition? What does that mean? What does that look like? So students, any child or youth who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence is considered homeless under McKinney-Vento. That can be a student who's sharing housing due to loss of housing or an economic hardship or any similar reason, so fleeing domestic violence, that type of thing. Living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds due to lack of alternative or adequate accommodations. Living in emergency or transitional shelters, abandoned in hospitals, living in public or private places not designated or ordinarily used for sleeping, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, bus or train stations, or something similar. Migratory children that meet the above definition, and unaccompanied children that are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian who do not have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So what does that mean? Right, okay. So they don't have fixed, regular, and adequate. What do you mean by those words? So you really look at that dictionary definition of those words, fixed. Can they go there every day? Is it a fixed thing? Is it somewhere they go every single day? Is it regular? Is it just like everything else? Is it the same as everybody else's? Is it that typical thing you think of where there's room for everybody, there's that place for everybody? Is it the place where everyone goes? Is it adequate? Are the lights on? Is the gas on? Are people sleeping on the floor? What does that look like? So when you look at fixed, regular, adequate, you're really looking to see that the student has all 3 of those things. If one of those things is missing for the student the night before they show up or the night before they're identified, they are eligible for homeless services under McKinney-Vento. So liaisons are really looking at that nighttime residence where they stayed the night before. Just like with coordinated entry and assessment, you're looking at where did you sleep last night? Our school districts are doing the same thing. Our school districts are just a little bit broader in what they look for. So looking for those students that have to bounce around constantly because there's not a place for them to stay. They're looking for those families that are staying long-term in motel hotels because they can't either afford a place of their own, don't have the credit to get an apartment on their own, don't have the background check to be able to move into an apartment complex or rent, whatever that looks like for those families. Looking for families that are squatting or that are living in a home that might be theirs, but they don't have the ability to have utilities on in their name. whether they have back balances that they can't get things on in their name, whether pipes have broken, they can't fix them, whatever that looks like are all things that make a student potentially eligible for McKinney-Vento underneath the McKinney-Vento Act for school purposes. So Liaison's job really is that, to like look for those things, looking at those 3 words in the definition of who it is that could be eligible for services under McKinney-Vento.
So we have just a statement of support to back up what you're saying. So we have a comment that says, this is something that our McKinney-Vento liaisons struggle with. We are an emergency shelter for runaway and homeless youth. Often we are told our kids are not homeless because they can return home if they are on the run. I have had to take it to the state in the past to get a youth transportation to their school from the shelter.
Thank you. Is there anything else for this one? Okay. So I'll move on here. If you have questions, feel free to keep asking. Okay, so we know that with this definition of homeless, when we look at homelessness, we know that our students experience different things. It affects our students differently, affects each of us differently in our age and what we do, but it really plays tolls on the youth that are experiencing homelessness. We know that more than half of homeless youth report at least 2 or more adverse childhood effects to their ACEs in their lifetime compared to their housed peers. So they're quite as much more likely to experience some sort of childhood trauma. Suicide. Homeless teens are 5.3 times more likely to attempt suicide than their housed peers. 1 in 5 homeless youth report experiencing dating violence. It's almost 4 times higher than that of their housed peers. 26% of homeless youth report being physically forced to have sex, a rate that's 3 times higher than their housed peers. When we look at, especially those dating violence and that sexual assault, a lot of our youth, especially our unaccompanied youth, they turn to doing things they might not normally do for a place to stay. They might exchange having sex with someone for being able to stay the night there. Looking at ways in which we can help support our youth in finding shelter, finding places to go so they don't have to put themselves in risky situations will only help our youth be more successful within school. Helping our youth overcome some of the things that might be putting barriers up or that they're worried about day to day will only help our students concentrate a bit more in school. So how does homelessness and how do these things play an effect on our attendance and what our attendance looks like within the schools? So U of M's Poverty Solutions has put out some great briefs and tables and some publications recently around effects of homelessness in school attendance, effects of discipline and homelessness and how those work together, some data information on City of Detroit and how Detroit has identified students and have increasingly identified students this year, but there's still a long way to go. So if you have a chance and you haven't had to, Poverty Solutions out of U of M has some great resources that have some research and some data tied to them around homelessness. So here's just a couple of the tables from some of their most recent briefs. The first one that Poverty Solutions really dived into was that around chronic absenteeism and what that looked like across Michigan. So in this table, you can see that when you look at income stability of a student and where they fall in attendance. So all students have about a 16% absenteeism rate across the school year. Homeless students have 40%. So homeless students are almost, triple, quadruple the amount likely to have chronic absence from school. So what is chronic absence? 10 or more days of school, missing school in a school year. So a homeless student, almost half of our homeless students have 10 or more absences across the school. So much higher than any other of our subpopulations across our districts, higher than housed students, higher than economically disadvantaged students. Our homeless students are so much more likely to be chronically homeless, which only makes them fall further and further behind on their education. Just look at how that translates into their graduation rate. We know that at least 81% of our students every school year across the state are going to graduate high school without a problem. only 58% of a student who's experiencing homelessness is likely to graduate from high school. So what can we do to ensure that our students are staying in school? Why is the attendance related to the graduation rate? How does that play with their homelessness? Well, if a student isn't fully accessing McKinney-Vento and isn't able to stay with that education continuity, they fall 4 to 6 months behind on education every single time they change schools. So if we aren't able to help students remain in their school of origin, help students with credit recovery, which we'll get into in a little bit of what both of those look like, our students fall behind 4 to 6 months. So go back to that last conversation where you have students who are not knowing where they're going to go every night, who are doing risky things for a place to stay, so are falling further behind in school. Who knows where they might be sleeping? They're not only becoming chronically absent, but they're probably bouncing around a lot. So they don't know where they can go to school on a consistent basis or know to be able to connect with the liaison to stay within a school. So they could be bouncing from school district to school district every single year. So if you fall behind 4 to 6 months every time you change a school district, and you're changing a school district at least every year, you're at least a year, if not 2, behind in graduating your high school or your education degree. So making sure that we're working with our students to provide that stability, that support that they need to be successful in school, and then also providing the support they need to regain where they were at in their school to help them be caught up to speed to their peers on what education looks like and be at those same rates. So really looking at how we can increase the attendance of our students in school to increase the rate of graduation across our students, to only help our students end that cycle of homelessness for them and their families. So part of McKinney-Vento and the liaison's duty is we must remove barriers to education. What are those barriers to education? Barriers are enrollment requirements. Do you have records? Do you have immunizations? Do you have your proof of residency or your guardianship paper? What does that look like? How do we remove those barriers? We just kind of talked a little bit about that impact of trauma on social, emotional, and mental health and what that looks like. What can we do as a district and as service providers to help support that? Many of our students lack school supplies, clothing, or other basic needs that they need met to attend school. A place to take a shower every day and be clean and not be the smelly kid in class. Lack of access to programs. We know that students who are engaged in after-school programs, sport clubs, whatever that looks like, are more engaged in school than those that are not. Lack of transportation, not being able to get to and from school and have what you need for school. Poor health, fatigue, hunger, showing up to school where last meal you might have ate was lunch on Friday and you've had some snacks here and there and it's Monday now and you're starving and you can't wait for that free breakfast at school. Unmet medical or dental needs, prejudice and misunderstanding. Thinking about the kid that's acting out or sleeping in class because they're class clown or whatever it might be. Is there something deeper going on? Having those conversations, having those people within the school that you can have those conversations and open with, and that trusting adult for students experiencing homelessness. So how do we go about removing these barriers as a district and as a system? So first we look at identification and immediate enrollment. Identification is first and foremost. Our liaisons are tackled with identifying students experiencing homelessness. This can look different because it happens all school year long. You don't just identify students at the beginning of the school year, but throughout an entire school year. So whilst districts may add a residency question of where did you sleep last night on their enrollment form, they're also making sure that their school district staff know who is homeless, what is homeless. They know what to do if they think someone in their school classroom might be homeless. They have signs and symptoms and warning or whatever of what students could look like, and they know where to send students if they think a student might be struggling with a place to stay at night. They make sure that everyone across the district knows what that means. So now we have our students identified, whether it's at point of enrollment, sometime middle of the school year, whatever that looks like. These students also get immediate enrollment. they get to be enrolled in school or re-enrolled in school, or making sure they're participating in activities the second they get identified. So even if you're lacking school documents or medical records or proof of residency or proof of guardianship, you are still able to enroll in school and fully participate. School district liaisons will then work with the student and the family to get those items, putting a plan in place to figure out how to get those items. Is a student missing a birth certificate? Okay, between the school district, the family, and the consortium, is there a way to go ahead and get that birth certificate for that student? Do we need to go down to the local city clerk's office and purchase a new birth certificate with an ID? Does mom not have an ID anymore? So first we have to figure out how to get mom an ID. So then we can get the birth certificate for the student. Was the student born out of state? Do we need to mail off for a birth certificate and what that looks like? What are different ways and possibilities for us to get those birth certificates? Making partnerships with your local city clerk's office, of being able to provide vouchers for families experiencing homelessness to be able to get birth certificates for their students at a low or zero cost. Figuring out that way. Working with your local health department for if a student's missing immunization records and needs their immunization records for school, how quickly can you get those over to the building? If a homeless student has fines and they aren't able to attend, whether it be an outstanding book fee or an outstanding whatever the fee might be from school, being able to figure out how to cover or waive those, because most fines shouldn't be considered against a student if they're experiencing homelessness. Does the student have an extreme history of absences? Don't hold that student accountable for truancy if this attendance is directly related to their homelessness. So if they didn't have transportation to get to school because of their homeless situation, you don't want to hold those absences against the student because they didn't have any way to get to school. Really looking at the reasons as to why those students were late in the first place or missing school in the first place, to make sure that we are only marking students' absence for valid reasons on why they missed school, not because it was out of their control to not be able to get to school and directly related to their homeless situation. If a student has missed an enrollment or an application deadline, still getting them in the door and getting them enrolled. If you're in a school, a charter school, or a preschool program that has caps on the number of students you could have in specific classrooms, buildings, what that looks like, you still can get that student started and they hit the top of the wait list. We can't break rules on mandatory numbers and ratios, and we have to have in schools, but you are able to put that student at the top of the list for those things. If it's something where a student really just missed because they missed the enrollment a window for school of choice, we're able to work with those students to make sure school of choice is a bad example. Don't use that one. If you look at enrollments for, say, a talent and gifted program, and they missed the enrollment window, that's one you can overlook and help that student apply for and get enrolled into what they need to be for program-wise. When you look at school selection, there are two options. First option is kind of two in itself, but ultimately it's two options. You have school of origin, which is either the school in which the student attended when they were permanently housed, or the school in which the student last attended. This includes preschools and it includes feeder schools or like receiving schools. So elementary in the middle into high school, all of those play into that school of origin. Or the local attendance area school, which is often known as the school of residence. So that's any school in which the neighborhood kids would go to. So if I'm living doubled up with, say, Allison's family, my kids could go to the same school district, same school as her children go to based on the assigned address for that house. Or my students could go back to their school of origin if it's still in their best interest. So the big thing you want to look at when it comes to school selection is that best interest of the student. Is it a place that they have connection to? Is the place they're staying in going to be short-term or long-term? What grade is the student in? How does the selection of the school really play into how that student's going to act and react in school? Where are the support systems? How do they lie? How long are they going to be in that situation they're going to be in for that?
We had a question in the chat. so I will ask you as well. Does anyone know if there are special absence codes schools can use to record days a student is absent due to being homeless or doubled up? Or that the student is absent but is homeless? Looking at ways that these absences might be able to be excluded from the calculation for the 10% of available school days used for chronic absenteeism.
It's a good question. I don't know that answer, but one of the grant coordinators is a people accountant. So I will see if there is one, and I will get that answer back out to Allison through everybody through a question and answer afterwards. But that's a great question. And that's one I don't know if many of us have considered, if there's that special code. So I will take that down and see if we can get that question answered for you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so then also with school selection, you want to really look at that age of that student and how it affects their education. So is it March and a senior in high school who now lives probably a little too far to transport, but they're a senior in high school. So you want to make sure that student is finishing that school year with their friends, their class, and everything. They're graduating in a couple months, doing everything we can to make sure that student gets there. Is it a preschool student in September that's going to be living in a transitional housing situation for up to 2 years? Does that make sense for that student to continue back to their school of origin or at a school they just met? Or does it make more sense for that student to go to the school of residence? So really looking at how that selection of school plays into the student's academic success and what is in that student's best interest for what that looks like. When you're looking at school selection, you want to take into consideration the opinion or choice of the parent or their unaccompanied youth. There might be a reason where you think that heading back to the school of origin does make the most sense, but you aren't aware that the student has been bullied or the student has been ridiculed and whatever might have happened at the other school. So maybe it does make more sense for that student to go to school of residence. If you think school of residence, same thing, something might be a group, there might be something at that school of residence that isn't the best fit for our student. So you really want to take into consideration what the family has to say, the parent and or the student. Ultimately, it is a school decision, but it must fall back on best interest of that student. So we have a student, we likely are headed back to the school of origin because that's what happens with most of our students, because we know we want to do continuity of education. We don't want our students to fall behind 4 to 6 months again, and what that looks like. So we're able to provide transportation for homeless children and youth back to that school of origin. For the entire, and that transportation lasts for the entire time that student is experiencing homelessness and until the end of the school year in which they become permanently housed. So the way that the definition for homeless works and the way that the status of homeless works for a student experiencing homelessness is a student is considered homeless under McKinney-Vento until the end of the school year in which they become permanently housed. So during that entire time, the students are eligible for transportation services, and all McKinney-Vento services. The students are able to receive transportation and maintain transportation back to their school of origin until the end of the school year in which they become permanently housed. Transportation should be comparable to what other students get. So it doesn't have to be a door-to-door service for students experiencing homelessness. You can do transportation to a bus hub if you have bus hubs in your district, and then the student gets on the school bus and rides with everybody else. It can be extended bus rides. It can be 2 school buses meeting at district lines and exchanging a student. You can reimburse a parent or a close relative or somebody who's going to transport the student for gas if that's what's most needed. Many of our districts across Michigan do use taxi cabs for our services for transportation. It's really, again, what we can do to get that student back to that school of origin and what mode of transportation is that best interest for the student to get them there. If transportation is needed and required, school districts are to split that cost of transportation through an agreement. If no agreement can be met, then it should be a 50-50 split. A 50-50 split is what the majority of our districts here in Michigan do for transportation. That 50-50 split can be just dollar amount right down the middle, or it can be an AM PM split, and one district does one and another district does other. Whatever makes the most sense from that agreement from those two districts.
We have a question about what happens if the student is permanently housed during the summer. So which school year do their services end in?
Yeah, so it depends on kind of when in the summer that falls, right? If it's if they've already enrolled and some programming is started for the new school year, it would fall in that new school year for school of origin. If it's something where school district hasn't happened, it's likely they were end of the last school year. So we're really, when it comes to that permanently housed in the summer, you're going to want to work closely with that district liaison to make sure that the best interest of that student is met, and making sure they're getting those resources they need to transition to the school district in which they are now permanently living in. So school meals. McKinney-Vento students are eligible for free meals, categorically eligible. The second they're identified, they're eligible for free meals. We talked a little bit earlier where students, maybe the last time they ate was Friday in school. It's now Monday morning, what that looks like. All a student school administrator or liaison has to do is send the student's name and the effective date, so the date they're identified, to the school nutrition director or the food service officer. And that student can immediately start getting free meals. So a student is, the second they're eligible, are able to get those free meals within school. If you have some sort of backpack program for food, they're automatically eligible for that as well within our schools.
Sorry, we have a back to transportation question that I missed. The issue we have is when schools want the youth to meet at a bus station or bus stop, is the fact that they have to walk there alone. Not only are some of these youth too young for this, it also puts them at the risk for being picked up for human trafficking.
So I think you want to look at, this is where you look at comparable services. If you have students within your district that walk to a neighborhood bus stop, that would be a way in which your students would also, if it's a school of residence. We know that many of our districts have bus stops in the corner across our state where students go to. If they're coming from a shelter or a service provider, do you have a staff member who could almost walk like a crossing guard and stay at that location with them? Is there a reason why a parent or guardian can't go way to the bus stop with them and walk over to that bus stop? Just trying to look into some safety procedures in which you all can put in place for your students within your programs. But ultimately that school district shouldn't be putting students in harm by sending them to a district of a bus stop situation. Many of our districts do have that outside wait for a bus stop.
Now one related to the school meals that you're going over. Are the schools required to comply with the dietary restrictions or food allergies for these students?
Yes. If a student is allergic to peanuts, a school district can't serve them peanuts. That's the biggest one. Making sure, right, that if a student does have a food allergy or something that is documented, yes, absolutely, this nutrition, like they would any other student, needs to comply with those. You don't want to put a student health at risk or in harm if they have extreme dietary needs within themselves, for whatever that looks like. So making sure that your food knows what those look like. I know a lot of allergies and that type of thing is much more prevalent now than it used to be. A lot of our food services are getting much better and more creative with what they can do for students that have special needs when it comes related to food and food services. So another thing we can do, and this is especially helpful for our older youth, our high school youth, is really looking at credit accrual. What does that look like? We have our students that are bouncing around. We have our high school students that are staying here and there, some that have attended school, not attended school. What can we do to help them gain up to their peers in their education. If they're switching schools, because that's what has to happen, is there a way to offer full or partial credit for any work they completed? Did they complete enough work for full credit to get the credit for that grade? Are you able to get their transcripts where maybe in District A, B, and C qualifies for a specific credit, but in District C, D, E, and F qualifies? Is there a way to match those two up and figure out what credit can happen for those students? If a student's really far behind, are you able to offer an additional online learning or recovery program for those missing credits? Are you able to do in a sense, a standardized test for them to pass or be exempt out of a program, a class they've completed? Is it your math looks different than the other district's math, and they have to go through your specific math program to get credit for math? Are they able to opt out of a grade that they've already completed that the other district thinks is comparable? Are you able to figure out ways in which a student can really just gain the credit for the knowledge that they have learned, even if the two districts don't match up exactly on how those credits apply? So making sure we're able to do what we can to provide some support, some tutoring, some credit recover, some credit accrual for those students that are experiencing homelessness throughout our districts, especially those high school students. We've seen quite a few students who almost dual enroll, where they're enrolled in general education for their to continue their education, but they have a bit of a technical learning side as well, where they're able to do some credit recovery and some credit accrual on that aspect. So figuring out the best ways to kind of serve our students to make sure that they have what they need to be able to graduate and hopefully graduate with the rest of their peers in their class. So through all of this, there is the dispute resolution. So if you have a family, parent or a guardian or unaccompanied youth who doesn't agree with the eligibility decision of a student, the school selection of the student, or how the enrollment went, a dispute resolution can happen. The state has put out a dispute resolution process that starts with a written notice of the situation, whether it's a denied enrollment, a specific choice for school selection on why it's best interest over another school. With that decision gets put in writing to the parents in a format and a language in which the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth can understand. So if it is to a family who at home predominantly speaks a foreign language, you're able to put that in writing in a language in which that family can understand. If it's a family that the whole family has lower education needs and maybe are at a 5th grade reading level, making sure that form and what the family is there is in a reading level in which that family can understand and understand what that means. So not including legal jargon within this letter. This letter is truly to provide that statement of this is why the decision is made and this is the decision we've made for this student. If the family still disagrees with that written explanation, if they still think, no, my student really needs to go to this school for this reason, their school of origin versus school of residence, they are able to file an appeal. So basically rewrite a letter back to the school. If they need assistance, the homeless liaison can help the family with this letter. It says, no, my student needs to go back to their school of origin for XYZ based off best interest. There's a whole plan put in place that talks about how that dispute goes back and forth, all the way up to Michigan Department of Education on how a family can dispute those decisions and what they look like, to see really what is in the best interest of that student. So it's not supposed to be a lengthy process. There's 3 to 5 days between each one of these little sections throughout what this looks like. But ultimately, the liaison is there to support the family within that process as it goes from different levels within the school district to the consortium level to the state level. All during this time, a student would be enrolled in school and still receiving services while we're trying to figure out the dispute. Basically, safest place, best place for a kid is in school while we figure out all the adult stuff later. So this kind of leads into that question of what happens if a school district doesn't comply with McKinney-Vento or what of those things. So there's monitoring done by Michigan Department of Education, along with consortium leads working with their districts. So we will work with school districts to ensure that they are providing everything that is required under the law for every student, making sure that students have what they need to be successful, and making sure the districts know what that looks like. We haven't really had a case where when push comes to shove, a district doesn't comply, but there are written into the McKinney-Vento Act things in which the state can do if the student doesn't comply. So they can hold back Title I funding from a school district if they're not complying with McKinney-Vento. But ultimately, once we work with the district and work with the liaison, they typically are able to quickly rectify whatever the situation was that wasn't feeling like it was falling underneath complying with the McKinney-Vento Act. You're on mute now.
Thank you. We have two questions. So the first one is the second half of that original question. So after a student has been identified as a homeless student with an existing IEP, how long is a school allowed avoidance of compliance with the McKinney-Vento Act?
So after a student has been identified and they have an existing IEP.
Yep. So Edith, I'm not sure if you can type back in the chat what you maybe mean by avoidance of compliance.
I'll try and answer while she's typing, but what I'm thinking is happening is there's a lot of things that are written within an IEP for a student that I don't want to say trump because that's not the right word, but like overseed what McKinney-Vento provides. So there are things that can be written into an IEP for a student in special education that takes precedence over some of the homeless situations and vice versa. So a student who is in special education and has an IEP, they still have the right to school of origin, school of residence. So that choice can happen. A lot of times the mode of transportation will be spelled out in IEP. So that mode of transportation will trump whatever would potentially be determined on the homeless education side of the McKinney-Vento side. If a student is experiencing homelessness and they are enrolling in school and they say they have an IEP, but the district doesn't have an IEP, they're to do immediate evaluations to try and get that student placed in the best place for that student based off of their assessments for an IEP. So really just looking at expedited evaluations, but there's not like a specific timeline. Like the law doesn't say within 10 days you have to do this. It's not that. It just says expedited evaluations for students experiencing homelessness who need special education services for that.
Okay, so then their question also is, if the school isn't providing educational transportation services at all, is there a timeline for that?
Yeah, so you should reach out to the school district liaison. If that doesn't work, to the consortium lead, because this sounds like a very specific situation. So if the school district liaison isn't responding, then heading out to your consortium lead for your area, which we can help hook you up with. And if that still doesn't work, you can go directly to MDE, to the state coordinator, to provide some information there and hopefully get this situation resolved for that student.
We have one more question. I'm assuming it's the same answer you just gave, but I want to make sure since I am not the expert. What if the school has not provided educational or transportation services and they fail to provide a written statement and the liaison has been overseeing the process already?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. So with that one, same thing. I think you'll want to reach out to your consortium coordinator and find out kind of why. If the student, to see where that fell within the dispute process. Is it, why isn't the transportation in place? Is it a district that's a walking district and it's a student of residence? So the student's just to walk to school just like every other student. Is it a student who maybe didn't meet the eligibility for homelessness. So they're working through what that looks like and don't know that the family disputes that. So needing to put that in place. So if you're not getting anywhere with your district liaison, your consortium coordinator is your first stop after that, to kind of help you work through what that looks like, and help you rectify some of those situations within the district. Sounds like with that specific situation, there's probably a bit more going on. So we'd want to look into what's happening within that district.
This is a really popular time for questions. So this one is, when a student is enrolled in McKinney-Vento, is the school responsible for their bus passes the entire school year?
Yep. So a student, when they're McKinney-Vento eligible, they're entitled to receive transportation, free transportation, to and from school until the end of the school year in which they become permanently housed. So if the mode of transportation that was chosen was a bus pass, then yes, they would provide that bus pass to the school student for the entire school year.
That is it for now.
So what does this look like? And one of the things that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier when we were talking about the liaison duties was that liaison must provide referrals for health, dental, mental health, housing, substance abuse, and other appropriate services. So that's one of their arching duties. Along with that, they must provide to preschool programs, Head Start, Early Head Start, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, making sure that they're fully participating in school, have food resources, and have clothing and other things that they need for school, right? So those are all things that are in there that a liaison must do. These are things that typically, with the exception of providing to a preschool program that might be within their district or a special education program within their district, a lot of these things are community related, right? So when you're looking at providing referrals for health, whether it be medical, dental, or mental, you're looking at a partner. Who is that partner? How do we work with them? How do we serve each other? How do we make referrals back and forth? What does that look like? Same with housing, same with substance abuse. Who are those people that we need at the table? How do we all work together, and what does that look like? So helping with some of those partnerships and those coordination is going to be key in making sure that our liaisons know what resources are out there for their students. A lot of times our consortium and our consortium coordinators will come in to help provide a lot of this information for our districts, for their families. We really want our liaisons to make sure that they have what they need to make sure a student has what they need on a day-to-day basis in that education realm. So being able to partner and having those resources readily available that a family or liaison can just give to a family or a student is really helpful within that. Knowing what preschool programs, Head Starts are available not only in district, but in the community surrounding. So if it's a district that doesn't have a district-run preschool, knowing what community organizations or churches have a Head Start program or an early Head Start program for those younger children within the household. I'm really looking at providing that full list of community supports that are out there for families. Looking at other needs related to students fully participating in school. So what food resources are out there? Do you have food pantries in your area? Are there blessings in a backpack or that type of program around that can help provide food and resources to your families experiencing homelessness? What access to clothing? Do you have clothing closets and referrals for clothing? Do you have voucher systems set up in your area? What are ways in which we can make sure that our school districts have all those readily available and have those communications? So a big role of that liaison in the consortium is to look for those resources across the area and be able to provide that list and that continuity of services to our families for all the different resources that a student might need to help them be successful in school. So the big thing to remember when it comes to like services to students that are experiencing homelessness provided by the school is it's any service or any resource that will make that is educationally related for a student. So that is related to the education needs of that student. So we might know that when it comes to clothing, they may have clothing to come every day, but do they have clothing to participate in gym class that they need? Because they're right, that's separate clothing and what that looks like. So making sure that those students have everything they need so that they're able to be educationally successful and not have to stand out because of their family experiencing homelessness.
So we have a few questions. Can McKinney-Vento assist with guardianship of a student to remove them from homelessness?
McKinney-Vento as a whole, no. So McKinney-Vento really is that looking at that education need of the student. They can provide resources for what guardianship looks like, but they don't have a play in actual guardianship itself.
Can a liaison authorize transportation for a homeless parent to obtain groceries from a local store for the homeless student?
Under McKinney-Vento itself, no, but many districts have general fund that they're able to help provide that with. A big thing that some districts have been doing lately is setting up a Shipt or an Instacart, depending on where you live, and having things delivered to where the family is staying.
And last one for now, should rapid rehousing service providers be ensuring that their families already have a connection with McKinney-Vento, or will the school identify the children?
So both. We're going to get into a little bit of what partnership looks like on the next slide between our housing programs and our schools, and how those interact with each other, but it's kind of a combination of both. But also knowing that a lot of our rapid rehousing programs, depending on how they look at or ran, could potentially be permanent housing situations. So looking at the difference between on what homeless status the family carries being in each of the different programs. So we're gonna get into a little bit of that partnership right after I talk about FAFSA. So FAFSA is the federal financial aid for students going off to college, right? It is FAFSA season. It opened October 1st. So with that, students experiencing homelessness, especially unaccompanied homeless youth, have rights under FAFSA. One, we encourage all of our students, but McKinney-Vento has a big push on making sure that students apply for FAFSA so they're able to go to post-secondary, whether it's trade school or community college or local university. With that, an unaccompanied homeless youth has the right to file for independent status under McKinney-Vento for financial aid. So what takes there is a letter from the district liaison or a shelter, HUD shelter staff, or a runaway homeless youth shelter staff to say that yes, this student was experiencing homelessness during this school year and is an unaccompanied youth and doesn't have contact with a parent or guardian. This allows that student to file for FAFSA as an unaccompanied youth, as an independent student, so that they don't have to find the income information out for the parents and or get their parent signature off on FAFSA. So it allows these students who are unaccompanied, who are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, that right to that higher education and an easier way to access that. So when we're looking at, when you look at who do we tell, who tells who, how do we find out about homeless students? It's a little bit of both. So the big thing to look at is both systems, the McKinney-Vento Education Act, the HUD side of McKinney-Vento, the COCs, they all require that education talks to housing and housing talks to education. But what does that look like? How do we make sure that happens? Many local consortiums and areas have set up referral processes between housing programs or through coordinated entry. So if you don't have that in your area or you don't know what that is, reaching out to your continuum of care or your school districts to figure out the best ways to ensure that your students that are entering housing or entering shelter are identified by school districts. And the same thing for school districts of making sure that our school districts, if they have a shelter in their area, they know of a housing provider in their area that provides housing for homeless students, they're also talking to their partners and making sure they're asking, do you have new students enrolled? What does this look like? A lot of times our school districts won't know if families in a housing program unless they're identified by the parents or through the housing staff themselves. So really setting up a referral system is super helpful in helping identify those families. It's a little easier with shelter because your shelter address will most times be the same all the time. So it's easier for a district to know who's in the shelter program. But for a lot of our housing programs, with everything being scattered site, it's not necessarily an address that identifies that student as homeless for them.
So I think there's 4 questions. Can a teenage mother use FAFSA to pay for childcare? I don't think so, but I'm.
No, so FAFSA is, well, I mean, should they? Maybe. So it depends on how much FAFSA they get and what they want to use and how they want to use that loan. So there's in FAFSA, there is room and board tied to FAFSA a lot of times. So depending on the situation in the room and board of that student, childcare could fall under there. But there's a lot of areas that will provide free childcare for students that are enrolled in school. So I would go that free childcare route before a FAFSA route for a college student.
So I believe this question is talking to the FAFSA when you were addressing an unaccompanied youth. Is that the route you would take for a foster student who has gone through the process of being removed from the system through the court?
So there, I believe, is different provisions for students in foster care when it comes to higher education and FAFSA. I believe within FAFSA, it's been a second since I've actually filled out a FAFSA. So I'll clarify this answer too. There is a spot to check if they were in or experiencing foster care through their last year of school, and that would count in that same independent status and help them qualify for that. But I can confirm the foster care and FAFSA and get that back out to everybody through Allison.
The last one is, does McKinney-Vento work with charter schools?
Of course. Yes. As we were talking about earlier, so an LEA, which is a local education agency, that is any public school district or charter school. So your public school academies, your charter schools, your school districts are all the public entity of education under there. So school districts that McKinney-Vento does not oversee are those parochial schools. So a lot of your religious run schools are not necessarily a public school, but anything that is a public school is eligible or must follow McKinney-Vento. So that's your public school districts, your public school academies, your charter schools are all mandated over McKinney-Vento. Now when you're working with those schools that aren't mandated, so your private schools, they are encouraged to follow the guides of McKinney-Vento, but they're not required to. But all of our public schools are required to provide services under McKinney-Vento.
And a new one came in. Does McKinney-Vento view living in a hotel, motel as homelessness?
Yes. Yep. So any student who does not have a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including hotel, motel, paid for by themselves or another entity, is considered homeless under McKinney-Vento for that. So kind of back to those partnerships and what they look like. So there's quite a few consortium coordinators across Michigan that are either on their COC board or leading their COC board. I think there are 3 or 4 talking this past month that are a big part of their COC board process and what that looks like. So that's a great way to have people at the table and get the voice of students and education, and also being able to have the housing world go back to education, having those vice versa. So really just kind of inviting each other to the table. If you're a liaison, making sure that you're inviting your local continuum of care, your coordinated entry providers to your trainings, whether it be in person to provide training on what coordinated entry looks like in your area, or even just a video of what services and providers are available. COCs, inviting your local education partners, whether that be this local school district liaison or just your consortium coordinator, to your table to provide a perspective from the school world, helping understand and work together to figure out unique ways in which we can serve families that maybe don't typically fit in that easy definition of homeless that we're able to plug right into a housing program. But is there ways that we're able to help serve all students that are experiencing McKinney-Vento homelessness somehow through a program within our COC or our geographic area when it comes to housing. Do you have non-regulated funds you're able to use? What different things can you use, can you parse together to help serve families that are in a double up situation? What does it take for a family who's in a double up situation to be category 1 eligible for homeless? What does that look like? How does that work? What does a school district need to know when it comes to housing and HUD, and how do they work together to making sure that our students that are experiencing homelessness, even though it may not be a HUD definition of homeless, but to remain some stability. When you're looking at diversion, knowing that a lot of times you're diverting a family back to doubled up situation, which still makes that family eligible for McKinney-Vento underneath McKinney-Vento and what that looks like. So there's still supports there for the school district, and talking to school districts about diversion and what diversion means, and how, yes, this may make their doubled up numbers could potentially go up, but what's the long-term effect of the student and the family? Making sure that your students know how to access service. So discussing coordinated entry, what that looks like, that there's really no wrong door, that it's on how they can come into your coordinated entry system and get access to services, and making sure that they know what services are there. So really just having that communication, having that open door for one another, whether it be a school district, opening their doors to housing, making housing, opening their doors to school districts, finding those different ways for shelters and housing and schools to just partner and just be open with one another. At your liaison meetings, at your COC meetings, opening up about what the needs are of families. If you have a COC partner or partners that are at a liaison meeting, let's hear from the liaisons, like what they're seeing as the housing needs of their students. If a liaison or consortium coordinator is coming to the COC meeting, let them be open with what their families are telling them that there's needed for housing. Same thing, what are your shelters and your housing and your providers needing, their students need? What are the things that they're missing? Is transportation still a huge barrier? Are you a family shelter that a bus comes to? Ensuring that that bus is the first pickup in the morning and the last drop off at night, so no their students necessarily see the shelter. Figuring out the ways in which they can work together to make sure that the best interests of our students are being met, and being able to serve our families in a way that makes sense to them and to make sense to our systems, so that we're able to house students and to make sure that the students have what they need to attend school, to pay attention in school, to be participatory in school. The parents can have some parent engagement and attend parent-teacher conferences and be a supportive, active member of their education, and then ultimately have them be stably housed within the community of their school, so that they have that support system and that network of community around them and what that looks like. So with that, there's a few resources that we tossed out there for you if you want to dive deeper into McKinney-Vento and what McKinney-Vento looks like. NACCE, their annual conference is next month. It's a hybrid, it's virtual and in person. Usually it is a HUD authorized conference. I'm not sure if it is this year just because of it being hybrid, but that's a conference to look at. NCHE is the National Training and TA Center provided by U.S. Department of Gov. So that is another option for you as well. Schoolhouse Connection has some great policy advocacy groups and some more just down to the basic tools in which you can use and help use within your areas and connections. Another thing with the National Center for Homeless Education, they're also one of the TA providers for YHDP. So they've got some good conversation starters, some good ways of working through how to connect with your education systems and your youth. And last but not least is the National Network for Youth. Just some other good resources on policy around working with youth and housing youth and what youth look like for that.
So just to drive home the point, Julie, so a lot of folks were asking about things for their specific area. So McKinney-Vento is the same across the entire state. and United States, correct?
Correct. Yep. So McKinneyVento is the same. It's nationwide. Everything I said is nationwide on what McKinneyVento is and looks like. If you've got specific things that you need for your area and you don't know who to contact or who to reach out to, let me know and I can make sure you get connected with the consortium coordinator for your area. If you let me know what county you're from, I can help get you connected that way.
Awesome. Just for me, I'd like to know, are there any McKinney-Vento liaisons in the audience? If so, you want to identify yourself in chat? Oh, we have one. So, oh, two. Okay, I was just wondering. So thank you. We'll give you a couple for more seconds if you have any questions to type in the chat. If not, I will start wrapping up. I first want to thank Julie for coming. She is definitely an expert in this topic and did a great job today, and we really appreciate her time. I also want to thank all of you. There were like 140 people that came today, which is pretty amazing. I know that everyone has a lot of work right now. And so again, I really appreciate you taking an hour and a half out of your day to learn how to serve your clients better. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat to Julie. Ashley, you should probably just email Julie with that question. Yep. So then someone's asking for the Schoolhouse Connection website again, if you can go back to that page. And the presentation slides were put in the chat twice. They will not be emailed out to everybody. So you need to grab that off of there. So we'll post them one more time for folks. Then we did put, so the way that we're able to put on these webinars every month is through donation. So we don't have a grant that covers this. So if you think that this is super helpful for you, think about becoming an individual member of MICA or an organizational member to help us keep this going. We love to offer these to everybody, and I hope that you found this helpful today. There will be a survey that will come at the end of this webinar, as well as in the automatic email that comes from Zoom. So please fill that out. It helps us provide you content that is what you're looking for. And then if you, I'm not sure how you found out about this webinar, but if you're not on our mailing list, please email me and ask to be put on our mailing list, and I will have you added so you don't miss out on any future webinars. I think that is everything. Julie, do you have anything to add?
No, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate you all coming and attending and asking a ton of questions.
Yep, it was great. All right, so reminder, this will be posted online in about a week. But with that, I thank all of you and Julie as well. Have a great afternoon. Bye.